All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we are talking about preparedness and war. Now, hold on a second. The world's not coming apart, but global conflict can speak to us about the state of a whole bunch of other things. Correlation, my friends. So grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at it. All right, thanks again for joining us, and a shout out to everybody who is following along on our YouTube channel. We are starting to place more things on YouTube this season, including our podcast itself in an audio format, should you want to just tune on YouTube and have it in the background. And we're soon going to be filming the podcast. Can you believe that? You'll get to stare at my face for an extended period of time. We put up 4 to 5 items of social media ideas, thoughts, and suggestions every day, 6 days a week. Get the preparedness message out there to get you to understand that there is a role and a responsibility for you to take hold. So today when we talk about preparedness and war, like I said in the introduction there, pause before you shut her down and turn this off. This is not about, you're going to all be fighting in infantry combat or that your home's going to get mortared. But there's a very good correlation I think is important and worthy of a discussion between the state of affairs and global conflict and what nations are having to do to what prepared people look like in the difference of people who realize too late that something needs to be done and they're running like hamsters on the wheel trying to catch up to everybody else. And so that's the intention of today's episode. And we first talk a bit of chat about glasnost and perestroika. For those of you who are old enough to remember, words at one point in our history were seen as an opportunity for a brave new world. The Soviet Union was attempting to fight stagnation at the very end of their economic collapse. And to save their span of control through perestroika, a new institutional openness to seek internal populist relevancy, to allow people to speak up without being jailed or shot, to allow people to bring up their ideas on how to advance the Soviet Union, and the ideas when you opened up the Pandora's box of perestroika were actually to collapse the entire thing and we want a Western ideology. Both of these ideas miserably failed, leading to the collapse of a superpower and the emergence of the globalist peak period. Now, for decades from 1990 to 2020, we enjoyed what looked like the highlight of globalism, an opportunity for individuals and nations to pursue whatever strategy best suited the times and the vision of their citizens. But in reality, this was the closing period of globalism. Globalism was a phenomenon made possible by the Cold War and the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was simply protected by the vast military-industrial complex of the United States of America. The dividend to Western allied global community was unfettered access to open shipping, economic possibilities, and in the case of China, exceptional expansion opportunity, the protection of the U.S. Navy over the seas, and the allowance for total immersion in global trade was the very catalyst that China needed to embrace a capitalistic framework within a communist government to allow them to become what they are now. A bit ironic for those that look through the lens of China as an adversary that it was the very American decision and operations over a number of decades that permitted, facilitated, and fueled the growth of China. But globalization was always an anomaly. It was the outlier condition that could have only existed because of a very few number of criteria, and those perished at the end of the Cold War. Now, we look at this through a normative versus positive view, the lens at which we examine global events, whether we accept the world as is, where is, or we insist on operating as if it were closer to our utopias, whose vision is not always shared with others, is critical to understand. So if we look at it, no matter what issue you're looking at, there are two frames that most people take when looking at the world. The normative post or the normative frame is the idea that this is what it should be. The world should be like this. right? You hear people speak in that phrase all the time. And it's not bad. Hope for an improved future is a positive thing. The world should be like this. We should be doing that. This is the right thing to do. People put declarative statements out, but they put ownership to it. They put an idea if it should be like this. Those with the positivist view look through the world as is, where is. Nobody cares whether you like it or agree with it. In fact, nobody does pretty much care about your or my opinion in anything. The point is the world is what it is. And understanding that, you then use that as a frame to analyze what is the best possible decision you can make in whatever field, life, personal, business, whatever it may be, right? So people always look through everything that happens through one of those two lenses. But if you look back at the global stage, since the beginning of the second half of the second term of U.S. President Bill Clinton, the world has been moving towards a deglobalized return to normalcy. Those who saw it happening and adjusted their national relationships, their economic ties, and invested in their defense spending, they're thriving on the world stage today. They are ahead of the game. They are ahead of everybody else. Those who held on to globalism and demanded a return to the post-war world order, where every nation respects borders and stays where they are and everybody gets treated fairly, they're now finding themselves behind the eight ball, the third monkey on the ark, and it's beginning to rain. And this is the reality that we see. You can look at it in an organizational sense. You look at it subnational governments. You could look at national governments. The political viewpoint of the national governments is probably the easiest to see. You see countries like England, France, Germany. They're all struggling very, very difficultly with the change in the world. They held on to this open idea, the Schengen Agreement, open EU, collective power, based a lot of it on the peace dividend that was apparently coming out of the Cold War. And apparently you didn't have to invest in deep diplomatic ties and military ties, which were the strength of international operations. And so these countries now are realizing, oops, I need a robust defense capability and I need a robust international engagement capability to be successful as the world returns to a state of normalcy, which is a state of global conflict, regionalization, and jockeying for position. That's the standard of nations since humans decided to form nations. Globalization was this weird period of time where everybody kind of worked together, but it was for a growth system. But in the middle of it, those realized about 30 years ago, probably 20 years ago, really, that the world was going to return to normalcy. So these are people who have been investing for 20 years in internal technology, people who near-shored, friend-shored, or brought stuff back home. In other words, countries right now, and the pandemic was probably the last indicator to people when they realized that 85% of generic drugs are made in India. The vast majority of PPE for public health concerns is made overseas, right? There's certain organic capabilities that a government needs to be able to provide for its people. And in globalization, you could just buy that on the open market and trade. And then the government of India stood up and said, you know what? We're not going to let any drugs out until our people are taken care of, irrespective of who makes them and who owns the factory. Bam. One shot, one decision by a government, and most of the countries in the world were brought to their knees because they didn't have an organic capability. Countries that understood this return to normalcy, this return to a state of uncertainty, began building those internal capacities, the ability to make vaccines, the ability to do PPE. There's an organic requirement for basic minerals. You have to be able to generate your own power. You have to be able to generate core materials like iron ore, for example, aluminum. These things all need to be made and constructed within your country, not outsourced to a different country. And one of the top nations that figured this out was the United States of America. And they did this through, obviously, they have the strongest military in the world, but they also used that military as a leverage for strong economic ties, right? They used to protect every ocean in the world. They don't now. right? You're seeing piracy happen right under the nose of the U.S. military, and they're not intervening because it is not their fight. You're starting to see that the U.S. government, and it doesn't matter your administration, right? Under Bush, and it was championed under Obama, was the reduction and the removal and isolationist of the America responsible for everybody's security. Now, obviously, the rhetoric around Donald Trump as president was much greater, but that strategy was no different than the strategy of Obama. And Biden's 4 years when he took over, he did the exact same thing Trump did. He just was a far less vocal and far less bombastic about it. But the United States of America is withdrawing from that world superpower role, and it has been for a decade. People who haven't seen that coming are now in an exceptional, difficult position, right? And I'm going to translate this over to our talking point today about you as an individual and preparedness, right? Right now, the vast majority of people in developed nations have a dependency on the government to rescue them and the government to provide for them both physically in a sense of being physically rescued, but financially, if there's a significant event like a pandemic again, everybody is going to assume that their government is going to issue checks to support the population through the calamity. What we're seeing now is the debt levels from that are so exponentially high in Western countries that some thinkers, not all, but some thinkers are still looking, if we had another pandemic, we couldn't do that. We couldn't issue checks to people to pay their bills for them when their jobs were shut down due to public health concerns. Imagine that. Now, in the disaster management space, when you look at insurance and uninsured losses within, especially the United States of America and places like California and Florida, if your home burns down and you don't have access to insurance or your insurance is insufficient, there's an ability to access a public program through FEMA or in Public Safety Canada here in Canada to fund some of those losses, right? They called, insurer of last resort and the funder of uninsured losses. That's coming to a close. There's a time in the not too distant future where when you have a major disaster in the United States of America, FEMA won't be able to issue checks to people. If you don't have insurance, you will lose your home and there will be nobody handing you money to cover the cost. You'll simply have to walk away from a total financial loss and try to start again. That's the reality. Now, people dismiss that as that won't happen, everybody will cover it, etc. Well, guess what? The people who see the future coming understand that this is the normalcy will be in 10 years, and they're setting themselves up now financially and from an insurance perspective to be protected in the future. And I had a great conversation this morning over coffee with two insurance professionals, and we were talking about this very idea that we have significant challenges coming up. We have challenges where expectations of human residents in a city is going to be that the government's going to be there to protect them, and they won't be, right? There's simply not enough money. I'll give you a prime example. Simple here in this wonderful country I call home of Canada, our interest on our debt is now pretty much equivalent to our sales tax. So the entire national sales tax that's collected basically is collected to pay the debt. We now pay more in debt as a government than we do for healthcare. And on an individual basis, the individual is taxed. The level of taxation that the individual pays now covers more than all of their disposable income needs, right? We're at a level of taxation now to just fund what the world looks like today. You add a significant calamity like a global conflict or another pandemic onto it, and there is no capacity for the government to cut a check for you. So what does that look like if you're sitting there today listening to this podcast and you would become dependent on the government, right? So imagine you go back into a pandemic, restrictions or otherwise, you lose your job, right? You lose your job and there is no money for you. There's no government assistance. There's no checks. You're on your own. What does that look like, right? I don't know when the next pandemic is. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, But I know this world is disruptive and there will be continuous level of uncertainty and significant impacts and potentially large-scale events. When that disrupts your life, when that causes you to lose your job, whether it's because of global conflict, a pandemic, an economic downturn, a recession, a change in government, any one of these exogenous shocks could occur. It is up to you to put together a plan. How do I earn my income when I get fired? It's part of your basic trifecta of preparedness plans that we've been talking about here at Inside My Canoe Head for 2 years, right? We've launched this idea of trifecta of preparedness plans 2 years ago, and the third one is, what do I do when I'm fired? And you may be a great employee. I'm certain you are. You're a wonderful employee. But look at the pandemic. Fantastic humans doing great work for healthy companies lost their income on a shot. Done. Over. They did nothing wrong. Imagine if you're in Jasper, Alberta, or any other Paradise, California, or any other town hit by a wildfire. You and your family make it out, your house burns down. What is that world? Is that the time you open your home insurance to figure out what your inclusions, your exclusions are, and what your responsibilities are? Then you find out, and I wrote a blog about this on LinkedIn, or it's over on our website, preparednesslabs.ca. What happens when you realize you're not covered? What happens when you realize you did buy the lowest bidder? You went for the lowest fire insurance you could have. Now you're paying the price because that low premium that saved you $20 a month on your payments actually is going to cost you $100,000 in loss that you're going to have to spend now. But all you did was search for the lowest bidder on insurance. You bought that policy and you never read the darn thing. And unfortunately, most people don't, and you read it at the time of a loss. But what happens if your home made it, right? Thankfully, you're one of the 70% of families that lived in the 70% of the town of Jasper that survived, right? So your home didn't burn down, but your place of work did. Now your home may be fine, but your employment's gone. Gone. What's your plan? What's your business plan? What's your ownership plan? So you can see how, whether we're talking about at a nation state and we're talking about the back and forth and the change in globalization, bring that down to individual levels, significant changes that are happening at your home, changes that are happening in your neighborhood, changes that are beyond your ability to deal with. Now, when we think about preparedness, it's often seen through the lens of what we do to navigate disasters, right? If you were to assess the phenomena of preparedness through the lens of public sector resident-facing preparedness communications, my level of expertise, this reinforces the concept. We need to be prepared to survive for 72 hours until the situation is fixed by the government and we can return to normalcy. Right? Preparedness is currently sold as a form of victimhood and dependency. When we limit the value of ideas to a certain frame, then we hold that definition to be true. That is preparedness. Grab your kit and a flashlight, and you'll be good to go, an astute and responsible victim until rescued by the magical government. However, we know that preparedness is in fact a lifestyle, grounded in personal responsibility, attitude, relationships, and strategic thinking. It begins with a determination not to be a responsible victim, but to become someone who is capable of navigating that which the world induces, whether that be a natural hazard being realized, the dreaded phrase of a natural disaster, conflict, economic downturn, political turmoil, cultural differences, ideological campaigns. All of this makes for a current disruptive decade. And for very good reasons, this will continue to do so. Now, whether you're a follower of Ray Dalio, Ian Bremner, Peter Zeihan, or any other number of global thinkers, we know that this is normal reorganization of nations that occurs every 70 to 80 years. And this has been going on cyclical and on time since global travel and mercantilism came out in around the 1400s with the Dutch Empire. And it will continue to do so for centuries to come. Once a generation has passed, and with them they die with the horrible memories of a global war and conflict, the current generation starts to jockey for economic and political power. This is what's going on, and it's likely going to settle in around 2032 or so with a new world order A new set of nations based on a new normalcy of regionalization, with economic ties returning to localization with a few international allies. That's what's occurring in the world. That's the positive viewpoint. I don't care if you like it, and I don't care if you agree with it. In fact, nobody does. We all want a world to maybe look a little different. We wish it was different. We wish everybody would get to live and come to a collective, but that's not the real world. So war is here. Global conflict is returning, and instability in Eastern Europe, Southern Asia, parts of Africa, and to some degree in a cultural sense in Western Europe will be the normal state of affairs for a significant period of time. Right? This is just the reality. The key is looking inward at your preparedness, your personal strategy, and how you intend to operate in a world that is changing like that. What are you seeking to achieve? Are you developing a plan and the relationships necessary to see that to fruition? That's when we talk about preparedness. The 80% is not discussed in campaigns to get a freaking ridiculous little kit together and flashlights and batteries. But the part that is essential for navigating this changing global environment. You know, there are those who believe global conflict will not impact how they execute their lives, right? Hence, no requirement to adopt a prepared life that incorporates the reality of the changing geopolitical spectrum. We see those people today, and they're represented as nations that have failed to see or accept the writing on the wall and the world changing and continue to blindly champion a world that was fading. They chose not to prepare for the new reality, and now they're in turmoil, desperately attempting to catch up and remain relevant. Don't be those people. The choice is yours. And part of our discussion is today, when a bunch of us were sitting around a coffee at Starbucks today, we were talking about the fact that, you know, there's a number of world countries, like I mentioned, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, who are desperately behind the eight ball, who are economically not prepared. They require vast international networks, right? Germany is only successful when it has access, unfettered, unrestricted access to international markets, because they're a massive exporter of high technology, robust commercial goods. That's going away, right? They've torpedoed their national environmental package by getting rid of a lot of their power systems, and they've set themselves up for failure. They're panicking. Their military is nothing like it used to be, and they're sitting on the precipice of global conflict in their region, right? They made the choices. Now they're realizing that other choices might have been more intelligent. And so now they're desperately trying to catch up. There are a number of countries in the region who didn't go down that road, who are doing quite well, and who have built robust economic ties with a whole bunch of parties that see the world the same way they do and have set that up for success. They're not going through turmoil. Even in Europe, Hungary is one of them. Right? Hungary, Romania is another one. Countries that realize that, you know what, we're not going down that road. You can have a great time, but we're not participating. Poland, to some extent, to the same degree. They are modernizing their economic and their military system at a rapid pace. Again, I know there are people that listen to this podcast who wish we did not have a growing military-industrial complex, who wish we did not live in a world where we had growing political strife, but we do, right? And I continue to agree that this is not the world that we would prefer. This is not the world we want, but this is the world we're going into. Now, I do not think there will be total global conflict. I think we will have a number of regional conflicts that will be ongoing for probably another decade or so before it's all resolved. That decade is going to be incredibly uncertain. What comes out of that decade is still uncertain, but it is going to be different than what we have now. And your life is the same way. And this is why when we talk about preparedness at length here in this podcast, and we'll end with this idea today, is it's about strategy. Successful preparedness is not about kit and equipment, right? It's not even really about skills. It's about strategy. Strategy is your ability to envision goals, to look at future possibilities that are there, to think about how you want to orientate to move towards. What are you after? And I said this to a colleague this morning. I said, I think probably 80%, and that's a wild guess, but I think pretty close to 80% of the world is just on cruise control. They're just seeing what the day holds. They got their job. They're doing their thing. They're paying their mortgage, and they're just cruising through life. If you want to differentiate yourself from that, if you want a different outcome, then you have to do something differently. And strategy is the key. Strategy is free, right? Absolutely free. We've got a couple of great episodes in season 8 and season 9 of this podcast about how to develop a personal strategy. We've got an entire module we're launching in our Adopt a Prepared Life course at the end of next month. Unfortunately, for those who are expecting it in July, I do apologize. Life punched me upside the head, and so I've had to delay that a month. But by the end of August, the module on how to build a life strategy will be added to our Adopt a Prepared Life course. It's available over on preparednesslabs.ca. And it teaches this, right? And it's our model of everything we do here in our group of companies and our group of operations here at our social media. Everything that I provide behind a paywall is available in front of the paywall. It's available on this podcast. This podcast is our public good. It's our offering to the world. It is free of charge. Every piece of information that we offer to our paid clientele, from strategy to preparedness, to ideas, to thinking through problem solving, to how to build a preparedness plan, the 15, 20, 25, 30 steps that may be included, the deep intrinsic complexity that is building a life strategy. That is all available periodic throughout all of our podcast episodes. If you're looking for a summative, singular place to where every idea is, and you don't want to listen to all 280 episodes, which is about 190 hours of listening time that's out there, that's where you transfer into the paid products. And if you want to understand what the paid products look like, we've got free downloads over on our website, preparednesslabs.ca. There's a free 3-page download on starting a family preparedness plan. We've also got a couple of issues of our Journal of Preparedness in Canada, JPIC. The next one will be coming out in September, which will talk about other ideas. And it's a more strategic thinking and idea thinking journal, long form writing, long form blog post. And I have not hundreds, but I have probably close to 57 or 60 blog posts on preparednesslabs.ca, all free of charge for you to read, that talk about different ideas of preparedness. So we offer these ideas out there, but your key to success is strategy. Your key to success is if you want to differentiate yourself from everybody else and you want to be as successful, if not more successful, with less effort from your part, it has to be framed in a strategy. And building that is free, right? We provide you the methodology how to do it. We provide the ideas. You build the roadmap. You build your strategy. And once you're after something, once you're getting up every day, swinging out your legs out of bed in the morning, chasing something, you'll be ahead of 90% of the people around you, right? Absolutely. Your outcomes are more than likely more certain than others. Your ability to navigate disruptions that get thrown at you are better than others. And in the end, that's what it's about. You being able to take care of you, those for whom you're responsible. You've built community resilience with that common number of people around you, that common sense of belonging, sense of place that you have in the location where you live. You build that resilient community, which means it inversely reduces your dependency on the government to come try to save you. Because as much as they wish they could, they simply are running out of road. Soon the government will not be able to provide post-disaster checks to people, post-disaster funding to people. That model is slowly but most certainly going away. Unless some form of collective insurance is brought forward that has the ability to spread the risk across everyone, you will see a model in the coming decade where the government can no longer cover your losses from disaster. Now, put yourself in that position. Imagine what that's like. You've got a $1 million home, which is not out of the mark for a lot of people. You got a $700,000 mortgage on it, and you choose not to buy or cannot buy flood insurance. And flood insurance, and a flood happens and you lose your home. Guess what? Nobody pays that bill. You still owe a $700,000 mortgage on a home that's not there. You go bankrupt, basically, as a result of a disaster. We see it all the time now in the United States of America, people going bankrupt as the result of medical bills, right? Now you're going to see a same number or more going bankrupt every year because of disaster losses. That's where it's headed. It doesn't have to be if you have a strategy. So thanks for joining us this week at Inside My Canoeette. I hope that was a little hopeful. Global war is real. The global world is changing. It is your choice to whether you look at that and adopt a strategy that includes the reality, whether you agree with it or not, and nobody cares, to be honest. This is the reality. Do you incorporate that in your strategy, or do you blissfully charge through life unaware, setting you and your family up for failure? It's your choice. Thanks again. Take care and stay safe.